Hi, and welcome to the Talent Lab. I'm your host, Brad McMillan with RPM Research, and I'm joined by my co host, Marina Hart. Say hi,
Hello,
Marina.
everybody. Hi, Marina.
so, yeah, just we've got kind of a unique episode out here for a pretty targeted audience. So, who's this for, Marina?
Exactly. So before we even get into the substance, we want to make sure to be very clear about who this episode is for. This is not for HR folks. This is not for our recruiting colleagues, whether it's internal or external. This is not for HR managers because most of those really do know how to conduct an interview from the very beginning to the very end. But we wanted this episode to concentrate on something that will give tools, tips, tricks to the actual hiring managers conducting the first interview with a potential candidate.
Right. And like we said, that's not a knock on HR or TA. They get it. They're, good at first pass screens, confirming baseline skills, understanding motivations, discussing culture fit, and just general communication. So
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
so they're often there to rule people in, not rule people out. But when you have all of that baseline information and it's clearly transmitted and reviewed by the hiring manager ahead of time, they can plan and get into the portions of the interview that can give better insight to the candidate's abilities to successfully contribute in that role.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what we're talking about. We're not talking about adding some time, to the hiring manager's already busy schedules. We're just talking about that afterwards. What we often hear as recruiters, as third party or agency recruiters, as well as when I worked in HR, is that the hiring manager always walk away from the interview feeling like they didn't get the clarity that they needed. They were not sure whether this is the right person or not. Something felt off. And I do believe that a lot of that frustration can be avoided by, well, frankly, just having better prep.
Right. And as they say, proper planning prevents poor performance. So,
Yeah,
and we understand that hiring managers aren't trained interviewers. There really wasn't a part of your job, a portion of time where somebody sat you down, broke this down into, small bits and pieces. You learned from who you were exposed to. But I think that we've got an opportunity here to elevate that. We understand you're scientists, operations, leaders. You've got full plates already. So the goal here isn't perfection. It's structure, intention, and communication.
exactly. And so the point of this episode is really not to give you a script because how can you have the same script for different roles at different seniority? Questions will vary depending on which industry you're in, which position you're in. What we really wanted to offer for the hiring manager is the framework, almost a way to think about prepping for the first interview, as well as breaking it down into certain segments that no matter who you're hiring for, you will feel prepared and you will walk away from that interview feeling pretty confident that you've asked all the right questions and you have your answers, whether this is or isn't the right candidate for your team.
And we'll touch base on this a little later, I think. But as the hiring manager, if this position is reporting to you and this is the first time you're talking to this person, based on your preparation, what's been shared with you, and your conversation with this candidate, you should have about an 80% comfortability whether this person can do the job or not. There certainly are going to be other people you may have other questions or want different perspectives, but you should be very confident that, that in your decision on this candidate. And if you're not, it's probably due to a lack of preparation, and consistent execution.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we will move into why the first screen matters more than you think in our next segment. But just to reiterate what Brett just said, this is just a framework. These are just suggestions that are based on working with clients, years and years of our own interviewing of potential candidates. We're just offering you maybe a little bit of a tool that you can incorporate into your suite of tools that you already have.
And, spending even that, 20 to 30 minutes reviewing a serious candidate and reviewing the information that you set up properly when the search initiated. So, resume plus notes, plus background, plus having a structure can completely change the outcome of the interview. So, when we talk with candidates about preparing for an interview with a hiring manager, we look at about a 3-to-1 ratio. So, if they're going to talk to you for about an hour, they should be doing about 3 hours worth of prep work on the company, the background, the job, what's going on in the news, really getting a good sense so that they can ask, high value questions. So we're not saying that you need to spend 3 hours on every candidate to prepare for that. 20 to 30 minutes, should be at least what we're investing in a serious candidate.
Yeah, exactly. And we will have a separate episode on helping the candidates prepare for the interview. But again, they probably take a little bit longer because they have a little bit more information to search through when we want them to be ready for this call with the hiring manager. But for the hiring manager, even a 15-minute prep will make a world of difference. Yeah. So, why does the first screen matter more than you think? One of the biggest issues or one of the biggest feedbacks we often get from the hiring managers is that they did not have enough time to ask all the questions. And I think one of the reasons for that is because they're doing repeat work. Hiring managers are asking questions that should have been already screened for by either your external talent acquisition partners or your internal HR team. Those are the questions that should have already been answered way before the hiring manager is asking questions that are more relevant towards what this person will be doing versus questions that are about this person or their past work history. What are some of the examples of those questions that you've seen, Brett?
Right. No, I mean, exactly. Things like, why did you leave your last role? What are you looking for now? Do you actually have the baseline skills? Those
Yes.
answers should already exist before the hiring manager ever gets on the call. And we really should never see the hiring manager reading the resume on the video interview for the first
Yes.
time.
Yeah.
If there's questions, write those down ahead of time, maybe highlight those on the resume, but it really gives the candidate impression that you're not prepared, and that the company in general is not prepared. So how you conduct your interview is also how you're going to be perceived in the market, whether the person does or doesn't get the role. They still have a voice and they still interact. So remember, preparation is also preventing your brand.
And again, we work with a lot of our internal talent acquisition, internal HR colleagues who sometimes get just as frustrated with the hiring managers not preparing for the interview because they did take the time to put those questions or to pose those questions to the candidates. And a lot of internal and human resources folks, they did put those questions to the candidate. They did put those answers in writing and send them together with the resume to the hiring manager who should have taken the time, but they didn't. So again, stressing the importance of prep work.
Well, and that starts, before the search even begins, or should start before the
That's right.
search even begins. This is what I'm looking for. These are key attributes. Give me your thoughts on this, but thoughts with evidence. How are we backing it up? I saw this and here was examples. So that proper preparation, this is why that job kickoff conversation with your HR or recruiting partner matters so much, and you're not just pushing forward the previous job description if you're in a backfill. If you don't define your pain points and must-haves early, the interview ends up unfocused.
Yeah, and we'll definitely talk in a little bit more detail about what are some of the most common mistakes the hiring managers make. But before we move to that, I really wanted to mention the human aspect of it. Just think of it this way: when the hiring manager is speaking to a potential candidate, they are talking to a human being who knows that this hiring manager has had a chance to take a look at their resume. Chances are they've already had a screen with HR. So even from the human perspective, they expect the hiring manager to know at least something about them because they've already spent the time and invested that time into putting their resume together, tweaking it probably to be a little bit more relevant for the role that they've applied for. They most likely have had a conversation or some kind of interaction with human resources or an outside agency where they've answered some of those questions. So when the hiring manager hops on a call or a video interview and has absolutely zero baseline on what this candidate is about, it makes them feel like they were not important enough for the hiring managers to truly get to know before they were able to speak with them. So, and I think that's also an important point to me.
Well, and we have to also look at who the candidates are. Is this somebody
That's
that
right.
came in through an application? Is this somebody that from a headhunting perspective was tracked down, was potentially interested in this position, but they have multiple options. They're not necessarily looking for a job, but they could be interested in the right role. You could end up turning some of those people away by lack of preparation and lack of shared communication.
Exactly. And so, I mean, we're going to keep repeating this throughout this interview or throughout this podcast is that preparation isn't more work, it's less rework.
Right. Right. Very good point. So let's talk about some of the most common mistakes we see. Showing up without prepared questions, not reviewing the resume, not having clearly defined goals for the interview and really for the position, and really not being clear on what problems you're actually hiring someone to solve. And some of those are going to be related to saving time, saving money, and improving process. And those are some of the key things that we should be looking for in this position.
And again, I think it is definitely worth mentioning that we almost need to have a separate episode on how to put those questions together, how to identify those pain points. So when you do get to the interview, you just have them ready, prepared, and that way you can compare and reference different candidates that you're reviewing for the same position. But I think one of the things that is worth mentioning right now is that it's important to keep in mind that the hiring manager is reviewing a candidate not for likability, but for capability. Just like Brad mentioned, what is this person going to do? What are some of the problems that this person is going to be solving? You're not relying on vibes, whether you like this person, whether you're hiring somebody who is a potential mini me or comes from exactly the same background. We say this a lot, but it really, really does matter. Interviews should not be vibes. What do you think about that?
No, I mean, well, we've seen hiring managers or had discussions with them, and the feedback is, I don't know, I just wasn't getting the right vibe.
Favorite. Hmm.
Right? And I think that comes down to preparation and intention. Um, and I think another one is accidentally interviewing for perfection, especially when multiple people are interviewing for perfection in the hiring process, which really doesn't exist.
Yeah, because sometimes the hiring managers don't really know whether they want a plug and play candidate, somebody who can just come in, maybe just have a very short ramp up time and be able to dive right into this role. Or if you are willing to bring somebody on board who, with a little bit of time, of your effort, your time, some mentoring, could be developed into what you need this person to be. And that distinction, however simple it may seem, that changes a lot of things about how you interview the person, what questions you're asking. So that's something that you also need to be prepared for and keep in mind.
Right. And, in addition to not interviewing for perfection, a problem arises when there's an employee that has significant internal knowledge, who has had several roles of increasing responsibility and may have been taking on aspects of two, three, four roles just naturally over time based on capability. And all right, that person we found out is leaving, and we need to backfill that position with somebody. And wow, we have to have somebody that has had that same linear line of experience and wore those multiple hats rather than the ability to develop them. And this rarely sets you up for success and should transition the questions asked before the role even goes to market about what is absolutely necessary, what can be trained, and what is nice to have or a new shared responsibility with an existing employee, or sometimes a whole new role altogether. So just this linear path and this dogmatic approach leads to long search times, a lack of clarity in candidate requirements, and also lack of knowledge about the available talent in the market that meets these additional criteria. So I've seen expectations early in a search where a client is looking for someone junior, but has walked the exact same knowledge and experience in the same time frame as the employee that's leaving the organization. It can be dealt with as the search evolves, but it eats up time and resources that would not have to been wasted and dealt with if they were clarified upfront by the hiring manager and internal stakeholders. And sometimes that's sitting down and having, rough, honest conversations internally. But that's clarifying expectations realistically rather than lowering the bar. So, Marina, what are your thoughts on that?
Often we see it in startups or in companies that are going through a growth spurt, right? When maybe the functionality and the responsibilities as defined on paper may not change, but the person stepped up into a higher role, maybe a position that was a little bit more strategic, right? But the scope of responsibilities grew under that function because the company grew. So a lot of times we see that as a growing pain for startups. Oftentimes, when somebody who has been with the organization for a while and really allowed their functionality grow like a little chia pet in a variety of different areas, right? Then they're trying to find somebody who can do just as many things just as well, maybe even without realizing that that is not what this role is typically looking like in the market or in their competitors or in similar organizations. And this is where the hiring managers, I'm going to be preaching to the choir. I understand that, but this is when you have to have conversations beforehand. This is when you have to get together with your talent acquisition partners, whether they're internal or external, whether you have to take the time to truly understand what are you asking? Does it exist? And depending on that answer, really kind of set your expectations to match the reality of the talent market that you're hiring from.
Well, and I think there's a big difference between does somebody have the capacity to wear multiple hats versus we're looking for somebody who wore these exact hats before.
Exactly. Yes.
Um,
Again, plug and play candidate or somebody who can kind of morph into this role. So let's set those expectations straight before you get on the phone or a video with a candidate and walk away disappointed because what you wanted you did not get. Yeah.
right, right.
As you may hear me say, probably again and over and over and over throughout both this podcast as well as others, is that candidates are not mind readers. I mean, no, really, nobody is. This is a big one. I know it sounds so simple, but hiring managers often want like just enough detail, right? But don't specify what they mean. And again, they walk away being disappointed because they didn't get the answers that they expect. So, what can we do to prepare them for it?
And so the candidate guesses, do I go very high level? Do I go deep? Are we looking for specific answers? Are we looking for situations? If you're situational, behavioral interviewing, that needs to be clarified in the question or in the way the question is phrased. You're not specifically saying I'm looking for this behavior, but in the way that you're, specifically presenting that question. So when the hiring manager doesn't get that clarity that they're looking for, they feel, dissatisfied with the answer.
Yeah. One of the most common feedbacks that I have gotten, especially from hiring managers at a higher level when we're approaching senior director, C suite level, is that they're getting answers that are vague. And when I asked what kind of questions they were asking, the questions were very broad. So the candidate almost like felt pressed for time to answer a very broad question in a way that was still answering the question, but not really going into the 5 or 10 minute tirade. So I think it's very important for the hiring managers to just treat candidates as humans. If the answer that you got was too vague, them. Maybe ask for a specific example, right? Interviewing shouldn't be a guessing game. As a hiring manager, your job is not to put up hurdles that the candidate needs to jump over and read your mind as to how they're supposed to do that. Your job is to evaluate whether they are a fit for your team, whether they can do the function that you want them to do. So make it easier for yourselves, not even for the candidates to answer, but for you to evaluate.
Well, and look, it's absolutely a two-way street. So candidates, should be checking in. We talk with our candidates about, answer the question, try and start concisely, and then did that fully answer your question? Would you like more details? So so part of that is absolutely on the candidate side. But if you're looking for clarity, just this proper preparation in how you phrase the questions. So it is the job of the hiring manager to guide the conversation if you're looking for specific behaviors, specific experience, trying to find out really the way that the person thinks.
Exactly. And this is what we prep our candidates for. So, what we're going to talk about next is behavioral and situational interviewing. Uh, and I think that that's going to be something very important for the hiring managers to once again keep in mind.
Let's jump into behavioral and situational interviewing. We want to avoid that corporate feel. So this is where behavioral and situational interviews come in. So tell me about a time where. What would you do if?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And those questions give you evidence and not opinion. So, once again, kind of echoing back, you're not interviewing for vibes, right? You're interviewing for capability, you're interviewing for skills. After the interview, you want to be able to compare this candidate with another candidate. And if you're asking questions that are more behavioral, but also that provide evidence of the candidate's capabilities, you can actually compare them apples to apples.
Well, and I think, did they, were they able to do it, but writing down just a few bullet points about their success and how they showed that they did it. And just tie those questions to the outcomes. Did this save time, reduce risk, improve a process, or sustain something important?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you wouldn't run a clinical trial without endpoints, right? So hiring is no different, which
Right.
which kind of talks, which kind of moves us to how do you structure and should you structure in interview? And we think that structure typically gets bad reputation, but um, people think that it kills rapport, it kills the feel. Like you need to be able to have the conversation organically or naturally. But I think there's a lot to be said that structure actually protects that and removes ambiguity. So again, not interviewing for vibes, interviewing for comparisons, interviewing for evidence. And I think structuring your interviewing conversations and preparing that ahead of time will work to your advantage.
And it's a challenge to create these, on a regular basis and can take some time, but there are people that can support you in that. But same questions, same bar, same scoring. That's respectful to the candidates and to the team, especially in a larger group interview or when somebody goes beyond the first interview. Letting everybody know what they're looking for specifically, what your concerns are, and what perspective you want them to gain.
Yeah, absolutely. Think of it this way, and we'll have to dive deeper into panel interviewing, the pluses and the minuses of it too, but that's a whole separate issue. Uh, but think of how the polls are conducted. A lot of times you're not asked just a yes or no question, right? A lot of times you're asked questions that are a sliding scale. Are you leaning, is it a definitely yes? Are you leaning towards a yes? Are you neutral? You really need to think about putting those questions, the interview questions, in the same kind of format. Mm, Make it a situational question, but then also kind of have a scorecard that will help you evaluate what you thought of this candidate based on some of the criteria that you set aside way before the interview.
Well, and not to complicate it too far, but,
Yes.
having a 1 through 5, or, like you said, that yes, lean yes, leaning no, no, or neutral. That's gonna give you some metrics, and when you're transmitting those questions between other, stakeholders in the interview process, you're gonna be able to see where they felt that and what they did or didn't hear. So,
Absolutely.
uh,
Absolutely.
but it's not but it the intention is definitely not to make interviewing robotic, but it helps to clarify this decision-making tool for what we're assuming is a very important position, or you wouldn't be creating it or refilling it at this point.
Yeah. Well, not to harp, but and we're going to talk about feedback and evidence, and what to write and not to write down in the next little segment. But before we move forward, help your HR, help your talent acquisition partners, help them help you by having that scorecard, by preparing for that interview. So when you actually do give feedback on how the interview went, you are able to provide some concrete information that will help them either find you a better suited candidate, maybe dive a little deeper into a potential like this particular person, or figure out whether you have some questions that maybe need to be answered with a completely different profile, whatever it may be.
That's not creating an Excel sheet on 4:30 on a
Oh gosh,
Friday.
no, 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 no.
This is going to be some bulleted points, some thoughts. Work with your recruiter, HR, talent acquisition to help develop those, and that can be done in a conversation to make sure that everybody is on board before the search goes forward. And as you see different candidates, it can be understandable that searches can change. I've seen this, I've seen this. Wow, I saw something unique. Now I would like that. Well, the structure and the changes need to show that evidence or update that, because, like we said, people aren't mind readers. So, want to talk a little bit about feedback, evidence, and we talked about some of the things to write down, but there are certain things to not write down. And so good feedback is evidence based. So what was asked, what was said, why it matters for the role.
Yeah, I mean, it's fact, right? And bad feedback is vague. I didn't feel it, not quite senior, not quite what I was looking for, can't put my finger on it. I mean, we understand that not always can you articulate exactly how you felt about a particular candidate, which is why having questions and answers scorecard, sliding scale helps you articulate your thoughts and feelings on the matter. There are things that should not be written down, like never. I think your HR would probably guide you best as far as what they want and do not want to see in writing, whether it is appearance or age related complaints or accents or anything that very reasonable person would kind of scratch your head at and say, no.
Right. I mean, these should not be considerations in any interview process whatsoever. But you certainly do not want to write your indications or feelings or assumptions or anything related to anybody in any of the HR protected statuses. And it's compliance, but it's really just the right thing to do. But while we do want there to be some written feedback and some feelings, structure makes feedback easier and safer.
Absolutely. Before we kind of move forward, and maybe this is just a little bit more relevant for this section as well. A lot of times, as recruiters, we hear from candidates that are not satisfied with feedback that they receive from the company, especially if it didn't move them forward in the process. So I think it's important to keep in mind. But here's a strong opinion. I believe that after a serious first hiring manager interview, they should be about 80% sure whether this candidate is a fit or not. What do you think?
Right. I mean, if you're 7, God forbid, 7 interviews in and you're still
Yes.
unsure, I mean, that's not a talent problem. That's a preparation and expectation and clarification problem. And that's where it really needs to, be handled on the front end. And that can take some teamwork to get that to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So, interviews are not grocery shopping. You don't just wander into the store without a list, right? And see what's on sale, and then maybe put something in the cart, take it out. People are not apples, right? You need to go in knowing exactly what it is that you're looking for. And more importantly, how are you going to tell whether this is the right fit or not? So, once again, prep work. You need to have a shopping list if we're going to go with that analogy.
Right. So in the relation to dating, it's more like dating. You should know at the end of that if you feel that there could be a second date.
Trust me, women know after the first date whether there's going to be a second or not, hands down. Be more like that.
So in closing, better interviews don't require more time. They require intention. And while we're not looking for every interview to have a checklist within it, you should have an interview preparation and execution checklist that is requiring structure. So that's what we're looking for, structure, not checklists, but to make sure everything's, done smoothly throughout the process, a checklist can be helpful.
And lucky for you, we did put it together. We're going to link it somehow to this. So you actually have something concrete that you can walk away with. But just again, to reiterate, you need to define your must haves, right? You need to know what success or a candidate in this role, in your role, success looks like in 60 days, in 90 days, 6 months from now. You need to coordinate with your HR or your internal or external recruiting partner before you ever interview.
Right, and, just try one of these tips, and tricks. Just try one of them in your next search or your current search. If you're looking for an overhaul, we can certainly, help and assist with that.
Absolutely. I mean, the checklist is going to help you, right? To define your pain points, building scorecards. But if you want somebody who can walk you through it, somebody who can take the time to have a conversation with you and do it for you, I mean, that's something that we partner with hiring managers on all the time. So feel free to reach out.
And, strong interviews are conversations with purpose. And thanks for joining us here on the Talent Lab. If you like what you've heard, have more questions, reach out. We'll be covering some interesting topics here in the future. If there's some topics you want to hear about, reach out. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.